Hello again, YouTube. My name is Bree, and in today's video, I am continuing this somewhat unintentional palette tour that I've been doing for the last several videos. It started with when I pulled out the sketchbook again and decided to do something with Roman Schmal, and by the next video, I pulled out a Gallo, and then it just became fun, so I wanted to see how different paints performed on the same paper with the same brushes, the only variable changing being the paint. Granted, there could be fewer variables, I could be painting the same image over and over again, but I would get super bored with that, so we're just going to keep doing whatever I feel like doing that week. I actually realized as I was opening this, I skipped a page, so I do have to go back and paint that dude sometime, but not today. So here we have another study of a woman in a forest, and I have a lot of feelings about how this one went, and they're not positive, but we'll get into that. This video is a little longer, I think, than the previous ones in the series, but the painting itself ends a little sooner, and then I kind of go into a troubleshooting phase that I decided to share because it might be of interest to someone else. We'll call it a little paint retrospective. I'm going to start sounding like a business person in a second and hate myself for it, so I'll stop before I make those jokes. Anyway, going back to the paint itself, Beam Paints is one of the first handmade paint companies that I started to invest in. I think I bought these in 2020, and I bought the Spectrum 11, which ended up being 12, the little birchwood palette that has 12 different paints in it. And then later I bought the Mother Earth palette, I think that's what it was called, which were 4 paints made from, instead of using pigments, it was like clay or like real ochre, basically how paints were made a long time ago when using natural sources. And some of the Mayan colors, which I don't use because they are made with mica, and I didn't want to overly glitter this one, though I did add a little. So I really love what Beam Paints does. Beam is named for the owner, Anang Beam, and I do apologize if I'm butchering her name, the places, or any of the other things, because I'm terrible about that. I can't speak. So she is from Manitoulin Island, Canada, and started Beam I don't know precisely why she started, but she decided to make paint with sustainably sourced materials, which I think is awesome. And before I go on, if you are that person who makes that comment every time I say this, that sustainability isn't real or vegan paints don't exist, I hear you. I don't agree with you. I'll save you the effort. You're not going to change my mind. Just move along. You don't have to leave a comment. I get it. But for everyone else, I really appreciate what Beam does. So instead of using like plastic trays or wells and plastic for storing the paint and then plastic to wrap everything up, as you saw, the palette was in wood, which is apparently sustainably sourced. I'm not sure where those scraps come from or how that works. And then for the larger paint stones, they are in a piece of fabric. It might be linen. I'm not sure what material it is, a canvas, something, and it's coated in beeswax to make it water resistant. So I really like that. I like that the shipping material is all paper and cardboard, so everything is biodegradable or recyclable. It's nice. I like that a lot. Just the little ways we can reduce our carbon footprint and try to help the world a little bit. It's just always a nice thing. It's not buying this paint is going to single-handedly save the environment, but nevertheless, I appreciate the effort. I do apologize about the little bit of brightness and light changes going on in this video. I'm not sure why that keeps happening. Something with the camera, I think. The lighting, I was very made sure to keep it consistent, so I got nothing. But yeah, I also did lose a little bit of footage while I'm on the topic of how this video went down. I didn't really enjoy the painting process, and then to top it off, I didn't enjoy the filming process. I actually had not cleaned my memory card in since last year, since late last year, and ran out of space and lost a little footage, so I apologize for that. It's just been one of those weeks. So about the painting process. I haven't used Beam in a while. I've been hopping around a bunch of different palettes, but this one kind of fell to the bottom of my watercolor bin and I kind of forgot about it. I thought the reason I wasn't so into it was actually the size of the wells for the Spectrum 11 palette. Excuse me. But maybe it was a combination of things. It is harder to get paint out of those small wells, especially if you're using larger brushes. So I started off using a lot of smaller paint palettes, and as I got more into painting and doing not larger, but using more paint, when I stopped painting everything so dang faint and started putting down more pigment and building up values more, it just became easier to use palettes that had more space to pick up paint. So I actually thought that was part of what made me less interested in these paints, was just the real estate. I think there was more to it, and I did have a hard time building paints up to the same value that I do in my other palettes, with a lot less effort. And some of it is just the paints, they do re-wet nicely, but it didn't feel like they were quite as saturated as they could have been. I also, like I said, I had a hard time getting the paint out because it is so tiny. So that is definitely an issue with that paint size. So knowing that and going in with that challenge already in place, I decided to supplement using those paint stones, the Mother Earth palette. Plus they're special. I like natural materials. It's really cool. But what I found was that the mixes weren't quite working out the same way I expected them to, and I was still having a hard time getting some of those darker values. So I started out with that. I did that Spectrum 11 didn't have a warm yellow. It did have the orange, but I didn't want to use it in the skin mix because I'm just so used to doing a warm yellow, a warm red, and a blue. So I used that ochre color. I think it was called Harvest Wheat. And it just, something about it felt weird to me. And I didn't realize what it was at first. And I kept working. There was a brown I was using in that too. And I couldn't seem to get any paint from it. I remembered the green in that set was really faint, but I didn't remember the brown being really faint. So that threw me off a bit. And then I used I think the other one is a Mars Violet. That's like one of my favorite pigments to work with. And that one is definitely more punchy, so I didn't really have the same problems there. But even when I did mixes with that in the blue, they would look really dark in the palette, but then when I would put it to the paper, like when I do the background later, it came out a lot fainter than I expected. At the same time, I was noticing that my paint water felt cloudier than it should. And granted, I am using some of that white poster color that is in this little paint palette, mixing tray, whatever, flower well, I don't know what to call things. But it didn't feel like I was using so much that the water should be quite as cloudy as it was. And I mean, I use white gouache and poster color in other paintings, so I do have some points for comparison there. It just felt different. So what I started to realize or remember is that beam paints are a little bit more opaque than I'm used to, especially these Mother Earth palette colors. I think that's what it was. They're more opaque. So right here I have that really dark color, and when it looks dark to me, I thought it was dark. I put it down. It's nowhere near as dark as I expected it to be. So I feel like the colors themselves have a certain opacity to it, and then they also dilute down really quickly. And yeah, the two things don't make sense to me in tandem, but that's just what it felt like. So if I got to the point where I was actually mixing on the paper, which is something I don't normally do, just to be able to amp up the values. Now, obviously, like under her ear, that part, I managed to get nice and dark, but I was working with a much more limited mix. And when you're mixing up a lot of paint, you add more water. I still feel that, and I think it's to some extent the opacity made it appear darker than it actually was. Now, right there, I'm pulling straight from the paint stone that's nice and wet, and I am getting much more deeper colors than I was coming from the mixing palette. So yeah, it's something that once I figured out, to some extent, I still don't feel like I have it completely figured out. I was able to work with it. I just couldn't work with these paints in quite the same way I work with my normal paints, and that was really throwing me off. I also, because I could not get the mixes in the mixing tray to then transfer, I just started throwing colors on the page, and I really don't want to mix on paper. That just doesn't work for me, because you might not hit the color or the value you want, and then you have to keep adding to it. I don't know. I did not find the experience enjoyable. I'm getting really annoyed by the saturation, the lighting changes. I promise I was filming at night with only the same lamp. Maybe there's something with my lamp. I don't know. I'm not aware of it happening while I'm filming. Anyway, off topic. But yeah, the paints, especially those Mother Earth palettes, do have gorgeous granulation. So I think using them more directly, it does have a big impact on the painting. It's really pretty. Don't get me wrong. It's just for the way I work, where I like to take a lot of mixes and build up layers slowly over time, it just wasn't quite working for me. So I did test this at the end. I do have a couple minutes where I do some tests of the paint itself and compare it to Schmincke, because I want to say that Schmincke is probably, of the brands I have, a little bit more opaque. They have a kind of weird opacity level to their paints, but they mix really beautifully, so it doesn't bother me. So I did a side by side there. I know that's not really fair, because comparing paints made with like real earth media, and then yeah, it's not an even comparison, but it gave me something to compare more directly. I want to love this painting, and this painting process, it just didn't work for me. I think because the process was stressing me out. The experience was soured a little bit, and like I could not get the hair to work for me. I couldn't build up the depth I wanted, so then I tried to add in more light to add a little bit of contrast, and that didn't work so well. It was just a lot of back and forth. The hair almost, in parts of it, looks like it was painted with gouache because of the opacity. Even in the orange, I was just really surprised by these paints. In a way I wasn't expecting to be surprised. It's not that they're bad. Like, I really want to be clear on that. I'm not saying that these paints are bad. It's just the way I work. They did not work similarly enough to the paints I otherwise use, so they're not my favorite anymore. It's basically what it comes down to. I mean, it's been a while since I used them, so clearly my preferences have changed, and that's okay. I will still keep them, and for those unique colors like the Harvest Wheat, I will find opportunities for those to shine in isolation and leverage them at that time, because I think they're really special, but they don't mix in a way where I can leverage them for a full painting. And then the little palette's fun to use, but it's just tiny, and it's not good for bigger paintings because of that. So, and some of the paints they don't look particularly low, but some of them, like the ultramarine, is starting to get a little low. I don't know. So for this part, I'm playing back and forth between the gold and the white poster color to try to make those little sparkly glowy orbs I created a little bit more noticeable, because they weren't particularly noticeable. And that pretty much finishes this painting. So this was different for me. It was really an opportunity to reevaluate, and yeah, I also got to reevaluate my lighting. I'm so sorry. Oh man, this video did not go to plan. Like I said, my camera cut out on me. The paints weren't working for me. At some point, the reference image wasn't working for me. I don't know what was happening. It was not a good weekend for this. But yeah. Otherwise, I hope you're doing well. I forgot I had more to this. I was signing out too early. So yeah, this is where I started to go back and just evaluate the paints in isolation. When I start this, all the paint stones have already been sprayed down, so they were already saturated. I find that these earth colors drink water pretty quickly and dry up, but you really have to start with them saturated. I'm used to just being able to wet paints as I go. I don't usually pre-soak paints unless it's gouache. Yeah, and like I said, I compared to Schmincke. I don't have one-to-one matches. The Schmincke yellow ochre I have isn't quite as punchy as the Harvest Wheat. The Mars Violet versus, I think it's Indian Red in Schmincke, but I could be mistaken. It might be Venetian Red. Are kind of close. I didn't have an umber quite like the Beam one, and I just went with Burnt Sienna. Realized it was not even remotely the same color. And then both ultramarine and the oranges are different because the Beam one is a mix and the Schmincke is, I think, a single pigment. So yeah, you could see the opacity here over that black line, especially on the lighter colors. I mean, both you can see a little paint on top of the black ink, but it's really noticeable on the Beam. And when I do brush my fingers over it, it actually does pick up some of those paint particles. So that's basically the issue I was having. Not only is it more opaque, but it has larger particles and it sits on the paper and gets reactivated there pretty easily. And I'm sorry for the state of my nails right now, but yeah, you can see where the Beam comes up and the Schmincke doesn't. It doesn't scrape, it doesn't scratch, it seems pretty adhered to the paper, and this is just a cheap scrap of Canson. But yeah, it performs very differently, so just something to keep in mind. But yeah, that's all I got. So I hope you're doing well, taking care of yourselves, and I hope to see you in a future video. Bye.